In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Arm, the Nexian Empire's flagship, Eternal Dominion, glided through space like a predator stalking its prey. Supreme Commander Vexthor stood at the bridge, his iridescent scales reflecting the starlight as he studied the holographic display before him. For 12,000 years, his species had ruled these stars unchallenged, their mastery of quantum technology and gravitational manipulation making them the undisputed masters of known space. The report hovering before him should have been trivial. Another emerging species detecting taking its first steps into interstellar travel. But something about this one made his dorsal spines twitch with unease. These humans had progressed from primitive radio signals to functional faster-than-light travel in less than 2 centuries. Impossible, he muttered, mandibles clicking in irritation. No species advances that quickly without outside assistance. His second-in-command, Carl, approached with characteristic precision. The monitoring probes are conclusive, Supreme Commander. They achieved FTL travel independently, through something they call Alcubierre drive. Crude, but functional. Crude indeed, Vexthor scoffed. Their entire civilization is barely older than a Nexian childhood. Send the standard warning, boys. Mark their expansion zones as restricted. They'll learn their place like all the others. But the humans didn't learn their place. Within months, they had not only decoded the warning buoys, but reprogrammed them to broadcast entertainment signals. When the Nexian automated defense platforms fired on human ships entering restricted space, the humans didn't retreat. They studied the weapons, adapted their shields, and pushed forward. The first real battle came at the colony world of Nexus Prime. The human fleet was outnumbered 10-1. Their ships were smaller, their weapons theoretically inferior. Vexthor expected them to break and run at the first sign of Nexian power. Instead, they did something no species had done in millennia. They won. The human ships moved in ways that defied traditional combat doctrine. They used their inferior gravity drives to slingshot around planets, appearing where they shouldn't be possible. They transformed cargo ships into impromptu missiles, loaded with experimental weapons that disrupted Nexian quantum shields. Most shocking of all, they worked together in ways the Nexians couldn't predict, each ship acting as part of a greater whole, rather than following rigid hierarchical commands. Impossible, Vexthor said again, watching the battle recordings for the 100th time. They should have broken. Every simulation showed they would break. Perhaps, Carl ventured carefully, our simulations were based on flawed assumptions. These humans, they don't think like any species we've encountered. They're savages. Vexthor's tail lashed in anger. They still fight wars among themselves. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their society lacks the unity and purpose that comes from proper genetic and social engineering. Their chaos given form. And yet, Carl said softly, they took Nexus Prime. The defeat at Nexus Prime was just the beginning. The Nexian Empire had always expanded through overwhelming force and superior technology. They had never needed to innovate, never needed to adapt. Their victory was always assumed, built into the very foundation of their society. But the humans refused to follow the rules. When the Nexians deployed their planet-killer weapons, the humans scattered their populations across thousands of smaller colonies. When the Nexians used their quantum predictors to anticipate human fleet movements, the humans started making tactical decisions using random number generators in game theory. Each Nexian defeat was explained away. Each human victory was dismissed as luck or trickery. The Empire had ruled for 12,000 years. What threat could a species barely out of its planetary cradle pose? Standing on his bridge, watching another fleet status report show more red than blue, Vexthor finally began to understand. The humans weren't winning despite their chaos. They were winning because of it. Every defeat taught them. Every setback made them stronger. They took the Empire's greatest weapons and turned them into scrap, then rebuilt them into something new. Send word to the High Council, he commanded, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. The humans cannot be contained. They cannot be predicted, and they cannot be defeated through traditional means. Carol's scales paled. They'll never accept that, Supreme Commander. The Council believes in the natural order, our order. Then the natural order is about to change, Vex Thor said, watching as another human fleet appeared where it shouldn't be possible. We thought ourselves invincible because we had no equals, but we forgot the most basic law of nature. Adaptation is the key to survival. And we stopped adapting long ago. As alarms blared across the eternal dominion, Vex Thor realized that his empire had made the greatest mistake possible. They had assumed that power came from perfection. The humans, in their beautiful chaos, their constant drive to improve, to change, to grow, had proven that true power came from the ability to evolve. The Nexian Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. But as human ships appeared in real space around his flagship, their weapons charged and their tactics unknown, Vex Thor wondered if perhaps it was time for something new to rise from the ashes of their perfection. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display in the war room of Earth Fleet Command, her eyes fixed on the spreading web of red that marked Nexian territory. 6 months into humanity's first interstellar war, and they were learning fast, perhaps too fast for their own good. They're adapting their quantum shields, she announced to the assembled military and civilian leaders. Our phase disruptors won't work anymore. But that's not what worries me. She gestured, and the display zoomed in on a recent battle site. The Nexians are learning from us. For the first time in their history, they're being forced to innovate. If we don't stay ahead of the curve, all our advantages disappear. Dr. James Rodriguez, head of the Xenotechnology Division, stepped forward. His hands were stained with the characteristic blue residue of salvaged Nexian tech. Then we need to change the game entirely. We've been trying to beat them at their own game, matching fleet to fleet, shield to shield. But that's not how humans won the Earth Wars. What are you suggesting? Chen asked, though the gleam in her eyes suggested she already knew. We go asymmetrical. The Nexians built their empire on predictability and overwhelming force. So we introduce chaos into their systems, not just in tactics, but in the fundamental ways we fight. The next week saw the launch of Project Wildcard. While the Nexian Empire continued to mass their fleets for traditional engagements, human scientists and engineers worked around the clock, turning seemingly ridiculous ideas into weapons of war. They developed quantum entanglement scramblers that turned the Nexians' own advanced communications against them. Civilian mining ships were retrofitted with experimental gravity wells that could turn the enemy's precise formations into death traps. Most importantly, they began to understand how the Nexians thought, and how to use that against them. The battle for the Arcturus system became the testing ground for humanity's new approach. The Nexian fleet arrived in perfect formation, their quantum-linked ships moving with synchronized precision. They expected to find a human battle group waiting to engage them in traditional combat. Instead, they found thousands of automated drones, each broadcasting conflicting sensor data. As their quantum predictors tried to make sense of the chaos, human ships struck from unexpected vectors, using modified terraforming equipment to literally reshape the battlefield. This is madness. Vex Thor's voice crackled across an open channel. You turn warfare into a circus. Where is your dignity? Your honor? Admiral Chen's response was calm and clear. We're not fighting for honor, Commander. We're fighting to survive. And we'll do it our way. The human way proved devastating. When the Nexians deployed their biological weapons, humanity responded with modified medical nanites that turned the pathogens into oxygen generators. When the Nexians tried to use their mastery of quantum mechanics to predict human movements, they found their sensors flooded with data from millions of decoy drones running on random number generators. But the true turning point came from an unexpected source. A team of video game designers, working with military strategists, developed battle algorithms based on centuries of human gaming experience. The Nexians, for all their technological superiority, had never conceived of using entertainment as a basis for military strategy. They don't understand, Dr. Rodriguez explained during a critical briefing. Every human child who's ever played a game has practiced thinking outside the box. We've spent centuries developing ways to overcome superior forces in virtual worlds. Now we're just making those solutions real. The cost was high. Human ships and crews were lost by the thousands. But for every defeat, humanity learned and adapted. They began to use the Nexian's own technology in ways its creators had never imagined. Quantum shields were modified to create temporary pockets of altered spacetime. Gravity weapons were paired with old-fashioned kinetic strikes in combinations that defied conventional defense. Admiral Chen watched the reports flow in, each small victory building towards something greater. They thought technology alone made them invincible, she mused. They never understood that tools are only as good as the imagination of those who wield them. As the war entered its second year, the Nexian Empire faced a terrible reality. Their perfect formations, their superior technology, their 12,000 years of unchanged military doctrine, none of it prepared them for an enemy that treated warfare like a puzzle to be solved, a game to be won by changing the rules themselves. In the darkness between the stars, humanity's greatest strength proved to be not their weapons or their ships, but their endless capacity to imagine new possibilities. Every failure sparked a new innovation. Every setback bred a dozen unconventional solutions. The empire that had never needed to change was facing an enemy that had never learned how to stop. The great halls of the Nexian High Council, untouched for millennia, erupted in chaos. Ancient protocols of speaking order and hierarchical respect crumbled as counselors shouted over one another, their iridescent scales flashing morning colors in the artificial light. High Counselor Zach Still, his age evident in the dulled edges of his ceremonial armor, raised all four arms for silence. In 12,000 years, we have never faced such a crisis. 3 core worlds lost. 24 fleet groups scattered. The humans do not just defeat our forces, they humiliate them. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the latest disaster. A human fleet had turned an entire asteroid field into a weapon, using modified mining equipment to launch thousands of rocks at near-relativistic speeds. The Nexian Defense Fleet, trained to expect conventional weapons, had been annihilated. "They fight like barbarians," shouted one counselor, his scales dark with rage. "They have no respect for the proper forms of warfare." "And yet they win," Zach Still responded quietly. "Again and again, they win." The reports continued to flood in. Across the Empire, client species were beginning to question Nexian authority. Several had already declared neutrality in the conflict. Others were actively providing aid to human forces, sharing critical intelligence about Nexian military movements. In the military academies, young officers began to question the wisdom of their traditions. Some advocated for adopting human tactics, while others insisted that stronger adherence to traditional doctrine was the answer. The debates turned violent. For the first time in recorded history, Nexian turned against Nexian. Supreme Commander Vexthor, recalled to the capital to explain his failures, stood before the council with his head held high. "We face an enemy that transforms defeat into advantage. When we destroy their ships, they study the wreckage and build something better. When we adapt our defenses, they find 3 new ways to bypass them. They treat war not as a test of strength, but as an exercise in creativity. Then we must crush their creativity." Another counselor demanded. "We must show them the full might of the Empire." "We tried," Vexthor responded, his voice heavy with the weight of repeated defeat. "We deploy our planet killers." They responded by spreading their population across thousands of worlds and asteroids. "We used our quantum predictors to anticipate their movements." They started making tactical decisions using random chance and games of probability. Every show of force has been met with a dozen unexpected countermoves. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Nexian Empire had been built on certainty, the certainty of their superiority, the certainty of their methods, the certainty of their victory. Now that certainty was crumbling, and with it, the very foundations of their society. In the shipyards orbiting the Nexian homeworld, the first signs of desperation became evident. Engineers, forced to abandon 12 millennia of standard design protocols, began experimenting with hybrid technologies that merged traditional Nexian quantum science with captured human innovations. The results were unpredictable, often dangerous, but they represented something the Empire had not done since its founding. They were trying something new, but it was too late. The rigid hierarchy that had served the Empire for so long now worked against them. Every innovation had to be approved through countless layers of bureaucracy. Every tactical adjustment had to be validated against historical precedent. While the humans adapted and evolved with each engagement, the Nexians remained bound by their own traditions. In the outer regions, entire Nexian fleets began to go dark, their commanders choosing silence over reporting another defeat. Some abandoned their posts entirely, fleeing into unexplored space rather than face the shame of failure. The Empire that had never known defeat was discovering that it had no protocols for handling it. The breaking point came not in a grand battle or a devastating defeat, but in a simple transmission intercepted from a human command center. In it, a junior officer was heard laughing as she proposed using modified entertainment holograms to confuse Nexian targeting systems. Her superior not only listened but encouraged her to develop the idea further. When this transmission was played before the High Council, the chamber erupted once again. Not in anger this time, but in something closer to despair. How could they fight an enemy that found joy in warfare's chaos? How could their perfect order prevail against those who embraced disorder as a strength? As the council descended into bitter argument, High Counselor Zack still watched the holographic display of yet another defeated fleet. In the debris field, human salvage ships were already at work, no doubt finding new ways to turn Nexian technology against its creators. Perhaps, he whispered to himself, perfection was our greatest flaw. Captain Maya Patil sat in the ruins of a Nexian command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the remnants of their once perfect military doctrine. Next to her, a captured Nexian officer watched in silence as human engineers swarmed through the facility, their tools interfacing with alien technology in ways its creators had never imagined. "I don't understand," the Nexian finally said, his scales shifting to a confused blue-gray. "Your species has no unified command structure. Your tactics violate every principle of strategic warfare. Your ships are piloted by individuals who routinely disobey direct orders. How do you function at all?" Maya smiled, remembering similar conversations with other captured officers. "That's exactly how we function. Every human brings their own perspective, their own ideas. We don't need everyone to think alike. We need them to think differently." The war had entered its third year, and the pattern was becoming clear to both sides. The Nexians' greatest strength, their unity of purpose and action, had become their greatest weakness. They had spent 12,000 years perfecting a system that left no room for individual initiative, no space for unexpected solutions. In orbit above them, a salvage operation demonstrated this truth in dramatic fashion. A team of human engineers, led by a former video game designer, had discovered that Nexian quantum shields could be overloaded by broadcasting contradictory signals on specific frequencies. The discovery hadn't come from military research or strategic analysis, but from someone who thought the shield harmonics sounded like old-school video game boss patterns. "Your species treats war like a game," the Nexian officer observed, his tone somewhere between disgust and fascination. "We treat it like a problem to be solved," Maya corrected, "and we use every tool at our disposal to solve it. Games, music, art, literature. Everything humans have ever created becomes part of our solution set." Reports from across the front lines told similar stories. A group of marine biologists had developed new stealth technology based on deep-sea creature camouflage. A chef had suggested modifications to ship waste recycling that increased fleet operational ranges by 40%. Even children's toys had inspired new drone designs that baffled Nexian targeting systems. But the true power of the human factor wasn't in individual innovations. It was in how quickly these ideas spread and evolved. When a mining ship captain in the Arcturus sector discovered a way to use industrial gravitational pullers as makeshift weapons, the entire human fleet had adapted the technique within weeks. Each modification spawned dozens of variations as different crews experimented with the basic concept. The Nexians, bound by protocols that required extensive testing and approval for any tactical change, could only watch as their enemies' capabilities evolved almost daily. Their attempts to copy human innovations failed because they tried to create perfect, standardized versions rather than allowing for individual adaptation. Your chaos should be your downfall, the Nexian officer insisted. Without perfect coordination, without standardized responses, without unified purpose, how can you prevail? Maya pulled up a holographic display of Earth's history. Look at our homeworld. Every major advancement in human history came from chaos, from competition, from individuals thinking differently and challenging the established order. We've spent our entire existence adapting to change, while your empire tried to prevent it. The display showed centuries of human warfare, each conflict driving technological and tactical evolution. The Nexian officer watched in growing comprehension as humanity's military doctrine continuously transformed, never settling into a single perfect form. You don't understand perfection, he said finally. Our empire achieved it. Every action, every response, every strategy optimized over 12,000 years. That's right, Maya agreed. You achieved perfection. And then you stopped. But the universe doesn't reward perfection. It rewards adaptation. Every human knows this in their bones because we've never stopped adapting. We've never had the luxury of perfection. Around them, the captured command center was being transformed. Human engineers had already modified its quantum communication arrays to broadcast on frequencies that disrupted Nexian fleet coordination. Others were reverse engineering its defensive systems, not to copy them, but to understand how to defeat them more efficiently. Even now, you're changing us, the Nexian officer observed. Some of our younger commanders have begun adopting human tactics, breaking from standard doctrine, creating their own solutions. Yes, Maya said softly. But for your empire, I fear it's too late. You can't take a species that's been engineered for perfect uniformity and suddenly expect them to embrace chaos. That's humanity's gift, and our curse. We've never known anything else. As if to emphasize her point, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. A new human fleet had arrived in the system, their ships moving in patterns that defied all previous tactical analysis. The Nexian officer watched the display, his scales shifting to the deep purple of resignation. The human factor had proven insurmountable. Not because humans were stronger or more advanced, but because they had never stopped evolving, never stopped questioning, never stopped changing. The perfect empire was about to learn the final cost of perfection. The Nexian homeworld hung in space like a fading jewel, its once perfect geometrical cities now scared by the reality of war. In the Grand Chamber of the High Council, Supreme Commander Vex Thor faced the assembled leaders of the Empire for the last time. The humans have breached the eternal line, he announced, his voice echoing through halls that had never expected to hear such words. Their main fleet will arrive within 3 days, but that's not why I'm here. The holographic displays showed not battle plans or fleet movements, but something far more devastating: culture feeds from across the Empire. Young Nexians openly questioning the old ways, colony worlds declaring independence. Even their client species were rising up, inspired by humanity's example. We're not losing a war, Vex Thor continued. We're losing our identity. Everything we built over 12,000 years is crumbling not because the humans are destroying it, but because they've shown our people a different way to exist. The final battle for the Empire didn't play out as anyone expected. As the human fleet approached the homeworld, they encountered something unprecedented: and Nexian civil war. Young commanders, inspired by human adaptability, turned against their traditionalist superiors. Ships firing on ships, brother against brother, order against chaos. Admiral Chen, watching from the bridge of the Earth flagship Prometheus, made a decision that would be debated for centuries. Instead of pressing the attack, she ordered her fleet to hold position and broadcast a single message across all frequencies. "We didn't come to destroy you. We came to wake you up." The revolution that followed was swift and absolute. The High Council, symbol of unchanging perfection, was dissolved by its own military. Younger Nexians, those who had fought against humans and learned from them, stepped forward to forge a new path. Vexthor, watching his civilization transform, found himself laughing for the first time in his life. The sound was strange coming from Nexian vocal cords, but it felt right. "We spent 12,000 years trying to perfect ourselves," he told a human delegation during the peace talks. "We never realize that perfection is just another word for death." The peace treaty that ended the war wasn't a document of submission, but one of transformation. The Nexian Empire became the Nexian Federation, a coalition of worlds united not by rigid hierarchy, but by shared desire for growth and change. Human advisors were invited to help restructure their military, not to weaken it, but to teach them how to embrace innovation. In the decades that followed, something remarkable happened. The species that had once been enemies began to learn from each other. Humans gained a deeper appreciation for the benefits of coordination and unity, while Nexians discovered the power of individual initiative and creative thinking. The last scene of the war played out in the ruins of the High Council chamber. A young Nexian child, scales shimmering with newfound emotion, asked a human visitor why their species had fought so hard not just to win, but to change the Nexian way of life. The human, a veteran of the first battles, smiled and replied, "Because the universe is too big and too wonderful for any species to stop growing. Your people achieved perfection, and it nearly killed you. We humans never will be perfect, and that's our greatest strength." Above the reformed Nexian homeworld, ships of both species now patrol together. Their designs are neither purely human nor purely Nexian, but something new, a fusion of innovation and tradition, chaos and order. They stand as a testament to the truth that brought down an empire. True strength lies not in achieving perfection, but in never stopping the journey toward it. In the end, the Nexians weren't defeated by human weapons or tactics. They were transformed by the most powerful force in the universe, the ability to change, to grow, to evolve. Their empire of perfect order fell not to superior firepower, but to a simple truth that humanity had known since its first steps out of Earth's cradle. The only constant in the universe is change itself. As new generations of both species look to the stars, they carry with them a lesson paid for in blood and fire. No civilization, no matter how ancient or powerful, can survive by standing still. The future belongs not to those who achieve perfection, but to those who never stop trying to improve.